The ridgeline stank of diesel and sweat. Heat shimmered off the trucks like steam from a forge as the engines died, leaving only the low rasp of wind gnawing through the valley below. Captain Hannah Cade stepped down last, her boots crunching on unstable shale that wanted to roll under her weight. She scanned the horizon, calm in a way that looked unnatural to the men around her. Dust hissed in the gusts, carrying the taste of scorched metal and old blood. She wasn't supposed to be here, not really. The paperwork said observer, which was military code for someone who watched from a distance, filed clean reports, and never smelled the copper tang of incoming rounds. She should have been back at headquarters, drinking bitter coffee under flickering fluorescent lights. But Hannah Cade had never been much for paperwork. Chief Ethan Rourke, lean, weather-beaten, 42 and carved from the same hard lines as the mountains around him, took the lead. His team fanned out with quiet precision, every man finding his lane of fire without being told. No shouts, no wasted words. Just men who had done this 100 times before. The snipers moved to their perch, setting up cases of weapons with surgical reverence. Rourke allowed himself one glance at Hannah. She didn't fidget, didn't check her gear 3 times like nervous observers usually did. She just stood there, binoculars resting against her vest, listening to the wind like it was whispering secrets. He didn't like it. She looked like someone who didn't belong, and that usually got people killed. "Captain," he said carefully, "you got what you need?" "Enough," she replied, her voice low and even. Petty Officer Ortega muttered just loud enough for her to hear, "Fantastic. We brought a desk officer to a knife fight." She ignored him. Through her glass, the valley revealed itself in layers, loose screes sliding down pale ridges, black mouths of caves, a dried riverbed where stubborn shrubs clung to life. She watched the wind whip the dust sideways, counting each rhythm under her breath. 20 seconds east, pause, then 20 seconds west. The pass was breathing. Down below, shadows shifted. Not shepherds. The figures moved too confidently, rifles slung like extensions of their arms. They lingered just long enough to tease the crosshairs, then melted into cover. "Range 650, Morrison," spotter called. "Wind 26, steady," Morrison confirmed, body flattening against his rifle. The crack of the first shot rolled through the mountains like thunder, then came back thinner, stretched, broken. The dust plumed short. "Mississippi." Morrison cursed, cycled his bolt, fired again. Sparks jumped off stone. The enemy scattered, disappearing into the caves. 4 shots. 4 misses. Rourke's jaw locked. His team didn't miss. Not like this. "Wind's playing tricks," Rodriguez muttered, sweat cutting tracks down his dust-caked face. Then the mortars began. The first shell struck wide, showering stone splinters across the ridge. The second landed closer. The third exploded with surgical accuracy, tossing men flat. Wounded cried out, blood mixing with grit. "We're bracketed," Ortega shouted. "They've got spotters walking rounds onto us." Panic edged into the voices around her, but Hannah stayed steady. Watching. Counting. She lowered her binoculars, her face unreadable. "You're shooting into a split draft," she said, calm as if reading weather. "The rounds are getting pulled 2 ways, up and down. Every shot will drift." The snipers ignored her, frustration bending their professionalism. More shots cracked, each one wasted. Enemy fire grew heavier. The valley was turning into a trap, closing teeth around them. That's when Hannah set her glass down with deliberate precision. From her pack she pulled a weapon no one had cleared, a suppressed rifle modified by years of use. She checked the chamber, settled against the stone, and became utterly still. Rourke's stomach went cold. "Captain, you're not authorized." "Neither are they," she said, nodding toward the muzzle flashes. "But they're still shooting at us." Her first shot whispered out, and down in the valley an RPG gunner collapsed before he could fire. Her second erased a man who thought heat shimmer made him invisible. Her third silenced a machine gun that had pinned their left flank. The SEALs froze, rifles forgotten for a moment. "Holy hell," Rodriguez whispered. Hannah's voice stayed level, conversational, as if she weren't dismantling an ambush with impossible precision, the one keeping you alive. And for the first time since the trap closed, the men on that ridge began to believe they might survive. The valley thundered with gunfire, each echo bouncing off stone and doubling back on itself until it felt like the mountains were howling. Mortars pounded closer with grim inevitability, and every man on that ridge knew they were minutes away from being overrun. But Hannah Cade was calm. Her breathing measured, her cheek welded to the stock of a rifle she wasn't supposed to have. Through her scope, the world slowed. She didn't chase shapes, she tracked distortions. Heat shimmer bent light in waves that revealed what others couldn't see, fighters slipping between cover, muzzle flashes hidden in smoke, shadows that moved against the wind. 2 o'clock, mid-slope, she murmured. Her voice was low, steady, the kind of tone that carried even when chaos pressed in. She adjusted 2 clicks left, exhaled, and pressed the trigger. The suppressed crack was almost delicate. Down in the valley, a man who had been signaling with a radio crumpled, his antenna flashing one last time before falling silent. The mortars stopped walking closer. Chief Ethan Rourke's eyes narrowed. He had seen men fight their way out of impossible traps in Fallujah, had watched legends operate with surgical skill in Kandahar. But he had never seen anyone red a battlefield like this. "Targets are collapsing," Ortega whispered, disbelief clear in his tone. "Correction," Hannah said without looking up. "They're unraveling." Her next round cut down a machine gunner whose barrel had been stitching the ridge with fire. Then she shifted, patient as stone, and waited. The shimmer betrayed another fighter edging forward. One more shot. One more body down. The SEALs, shaken but not broken, began to rally. Rourke barked quick commands, and his men shifted fire, following Hannah's lead instead of fumbling blind. Confidence flickered back into their movements. But the enemy wasn't finished. White smoke erupted across the valley floor, thick and chemical, turning the battlefield into a curtain of ghosts. The fighters slipped into it, vanishing from sight. "They're adjusting," Rodriguez hissed, sweat dripping into his bandages. Rourke swore under his breath. "We've lost them." Hannah didn't move. She watched the way the smoke rolled, how it thinned in uneven patches under the valley's strange crosswinds. She saw a flicker, barely there, the flash of a muzzle hidden in haze. Most shooters would have dismissed it. Hannah didn't. Her shot cut through the white veil, and when the smoke cleared seconds later, a body lay motionless in the rocks. "Incredible," Morrison breathed, his wounded arm hanging uselessly at his side. "She's shooting ghosts." The ambush was breaking apart. Mortars fell silent, the gunners blind without their spotters. Interlocking fields of fire collapsed as key fighters dropped one after another. The SEALs pressed the advantage, firing controlled bursts, maneuvering for the first time since the trap closed. For the first time that morning, survival looked possible. But Rourke wasn't celebrating. He stole glances at Hannah between bursts of gunfire, unease tightening in his chest. She was too calm. Too precise. No hesitation, no adjustment, no doubt. This wasn't someone lucky enough to stumble into the right place at the right time. This was someone who'd done this before. Many times. When the last echoes died and the valley fell eerily quiet, the SEALs lay among the rocks, panting, bleeding, alive. Smoke drifted upward in ragged coils. The enemy, so carefully positioned, so well coordinated, was gone. Hannah sat cross-legged, cleaning her rifle with meticulous care, her motions steady despite the blood and dust around her. She didn't glance at the men watching her with wide eyes. Rourke finally broke the silence. He knelt beside her, his face a mix of gratitude and suspicion. "That wasn't luck," he said. His voice was low, measured, as if he wasn't sure he wanted the answer. "And it wasn't just training. What you did out there. I've served with some of the best shooters alive. None of them read a battlefield like that. Hannah reassembled her rifle with a click, looked him in the eye, and said nothing. "What are you?" Rourke pressed. Her faint smile didn't reach her eyes. "Not what the paperwork says." The ridgeline was quiet now. Too quiet. Only the sharp smell of cordite and the faint metallic tang of blood lingered, carried on the erratic mountain winds. Smoke drifted lazily from shattered rocks where mortars had torn the earth apart, curling into the bright Afghan sky. The seals sat slumped behind cover, sweat streaking dirt across their faces. Bandages were tied tight, blood seeping through in dark blossoms. They were alive, but barely. And it wasn't because of their own firepower. It was because of her. Captain Hannah Cade sat apart from them, rifle stripped down to its bones, each piece laid out on a flat stone like instruments in a surgeon's tray. She worked in silence, movements precise, unhurried. Not a wasted motion, not even when the wind tugged at the cleaning cloth between her fingers. Chief Ethan Rourke watched her for a long time. His men muttered in low voices, the kind soldiers used when they weren't sure if they were grateful or unnerved. He finally pushed himself to his feet, limping slightly from where shrapnel had grazed him, and crossed the short distance between them. "What you did out there," he said, his voice rough, "that wasn't luck. And it sure as hell wasn't observation duty." Hannah didn't look up. She slid the rifle's bolt back into place with a metallic snap. "I wasn't always logistics," she said simply. "That's not an answer." Her hands kept moving, calm, methodical. "It's the only one you're getting." Rourke's jaw flexed. He had interrogated enemy combatants, sat across from warlords who lied with every breath, but Hannah Cade's silence was different. It wasn't evasive. It was final. Behind him, Petty Officer Ortega spoke up, bitterness lacing his words. "She's not even supposed to be here, Chief. Who sends someone like her to observe? Somebody in D.C. is playing games." "Shut it," Rourke snapped. His gaze stayed on Hannah. "You don't move like an analyst. You don't shoot like someone who left the range after qualification. You read that valley like," he cut himself off. He didn't want to say what he was thinking. Like someone who had killed in places no one admitted existed. Before she could respond, the thump of rotor blades grew louder. Dust whipped across the ridge as the medevac bird nosed into view, banking hard against the shifting winds before setting down in a storm of grit. The SEALs scrambled, helping the wounded toward the helicopter. The corpsman waved frantically for stretchers, his face set in grim lines. Morrison, pale but alive, clutched something in his good hand, a single brass casing from Hannah's rifle. He pressed it into her palm as she passed. "Keep it," she said, refusing it gently. "Remind yourself why you fight." Morrison held it tight anyway. He would never throw it away. Hannah climbed aboard last, sliding into a seat near the open door. She sat with her rifle across her lap, eyes fixed on the valley shrinking below them as the helicopter clawed for altitude. The kill zone that had nearly swallowed them whole was nothing but a scar in the earth now, peaceful in the way only battlegrounds look once the shooting stops. Inside the bird, silence stretched. The SEALs avoided her eyes, each man retreating into his own thoughts. Finally, Rodriguez, his arm bandaged, face drawn, spoke the words they were all thinking. "We're never gonna see her again, are we?" Ortega gave a slow shake of his head. "People like that, they don't stick around for debriefs." Rourke sat across from Hannah, studying her in the fading light. He had more questions than answers, but he understood one thing with absolute clarity: his team was alive because she'd been there. And he hated not knowing why. Hannah's gaze stayed on the horizon. The faintest curve of a smile tugged at her lips, though her eyes remained cold. The kind of smile that said she knew exactly what he was thinking. And that she had no intention of ever giving him the truth. The helicopter's thrum still buzzed in Chief Ethan Rourke's ears hours after they touched down at Bagram. The medics had swarmed his men the second the rotors slowed, stretchers whisking away the worst cases. Rourke stood on the tarmac, dust crusting his sweat-soaked uniform, and watched Captain Hannah Cade walk toward the hangars with the same unhurried stride she'd carried all day. She moved like a shadow slipping between the floodlights, her rifle case slung casually across her shoulder as if it weighed nothing. He should have reported her immediately. She'd carried unauthorized gear, broken every rule in the book, and inserted herself into a firefight in ways that would make command lose their minds. But if she hadn't, his team would be body bags right now. That thought gnawed at him as he limped inside. The debrief room reeked of burned coffee and disinfectant. Brass waited behind folding tables, their polished insignia catching the fluorescent light. Questions came fast and sharp, clipped with the kind of bureaucratic suspicion that smelled of politics. "Captain Cade," one colonel asked, "your orders were to observe. Care to explain why you were found with a suppressed long rifle not listed on any manifest?" Hannah sat straight, hands folded on the table. Her expression was calm, her voice even. The situation demanded flexibility. "That's not an answer." She tilted her head, as if amused by the repetition. "Neither is your question." The colonel's face flushed crimson, but before he could snap back, another voice cut across the room. General Alden, silver-haired, lean as wire, had been silent until now. He watched her with an expression Rourke couldn't read. "Leave us," the general said flatly. The other officers bristled but obeyed, gathering their papers and storming out. The door shut. Silence thickened. Alden leaned forward. "They told me you were buried." For the first time all day, Hannah's mask flickered. Just for a heartbeat. Then it was gone. "You shouldn't believe everything you're told, sir." Rourke frowned. "Buried?" The general steepled his fingers. "The program was disbanded. Files destroyed. People reassigned. You weren't supposed to exist anymore." "I don't," Hannah said simply. Rourke felt his stomach knot. He'd heard whispers in dark corners, rumors of a unit that didn't make headlines, that didn't wear patches, that didn't officially breathe. A unit designed to operate where no one else could. Ghosts in human skin. And she'd just confirmed it. Later, when the base finally quieted and the desert air cooled, Rourke found her sitting alone near the perimeter fence. She was cleaning her rifle again, the repetitive motion almost meditative. He crouched nearby, saying nothing for a long time. Finally, he asked the only question that mattered. "Why us? Why today? Why were you even there?" She snapped the rifle back together with a sharp click. "Because someone knew you'd walk into a trap. Someone wanted to see what you'd do without a net. Headquarters sends observers for a reason, Chief. You just didn't get told the real one." "Bullshit," he said, though his gut told him she wasn't lying. "That ambush was designed for us. For you, maybe." Her faint smile curved, humorless. "Does it matter? You're alive." He wanted to argue, wanted to demand more, but her eyes, cold, steady, ancient in a way no 30-something should look, stole the words from him. "You ever misjudge someone?" she asked softly, almost like she was talking to herself. "Look at them and think they didn't belong, only to find out they were exactly what the moment needed?" Rourke thought of his men, of Morrison clutching that brass casing like a talisman, of Rodriguez whispering that they'd never see her again. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Today." Hannah slid the rifle into its case, rose, and slung it over her shoulder. "Then you've learned the only lesson that matters." She turned, walking into the shadows beyond the fence. No goodbyes. No explanations. Just gone. Days later, Rourke found the casing Morrison had engraved. One word, etched deep into the brass. Respect. He turned it over in his hand, staring at the word until it blurred. Because in the end, it wasn't about who Hannah Cade had been, or what program had made her. It was about the fact that when the valley became a kill zone, and the best shooters in the world missed every shot, she didn't. And that was the kind of truth you didn't need paperwork to understand. Bagram never truly slept. Aircraft droned overhead, generators hummed, and the desert winds rattled the loose siding of hangars long after midnight. But for Chief Ethan Rourke, the base felt hollow. He sat alone in the operations tent, the faint glow of a single desk lamp painting shadows across stacks of reports. The official version of the firefight sat in front of him. Enemy ambush neutralized. Casualties sustained. Mission incomplete. Nowhere did it mention Hannah Cade. She'd vanished within hours of the debrief, slipping through the base the same way she'd walked into the kill zone, silent, unannounced, and utterly untouchable. Rourke knew better than to chase ghosts. Still, it gnawed at him. The precision, the calm, the way she dismantled an ambush designed to destroy them. That kind of skill didn't belong to someone forgotten in logistics. That belonged to something else, something darker. 2 days later, a message landed in his secure inbox. Unmarked sender. No return address. You didn't see her. She was never there. If you value your career, burn this now. Attached was a single photo, Hannah Cade, younger by maybe 10 years, standing with a group of men whose faces were blurred into smears. No insignia. No flags. Just a line of people in desert camo, eyes hard, rifles slung low. Across the bottom, 3 words had been scrawled in block letters. The program lives. Rourke stared at it until his vision swam. His gut told him the picture was no bluff. Someone had erased her from the records, buried her alive inside a ghost unit, and now she'd clawed her way out. Meanwhile, half a world away, Hannah Cade sat at a rusted table in a cobble safe house, field stripping her rifle for the 100th time. A burner phone vibrated once. No ringtone, no caller ID, just a single line of text. You broke cover. They noticed. Orders to return. She closed the phone slowly, her jaw tightening. She knew what return meant. Not reassignment. Not retirement. When ghosts were called home, it meant the people who made you had decided you'd outlived your usefulness. The quiet had been temporary. Now, the hunt would begin, this time with her as the target. And yet, a small, cold smile tugged at her lips. Let them come. At Bagram, Rourke held the photo in his hand and thought about Morrison's engraved casing, respect. He thought about the valley, about the silence that had followed each of her shots, about the fact that his team was breathing because of her. He didn't know if he'd ever see her again. He wasn't sure he wanted to. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whoever was hunting Hannah Cade was about to find out the hard way why ghosts should be left buried. The desert air at night was sharp and brittle, cutting through the canvas walls of the tent where Chief Ethan Rourke sat alone. A satellite radio hummed faintly on the table in front of him, its green screen glowing in the dark. The voice on the other end was clipped, controlled, the kind that belonged to men who never signed their names. Forget her, the voice said. She was never there. Rourke's jaw clenched. You and I both know that's bullshit. My men saw what she did. That's precisely why this conversation is happening. Consider this your final courtesy call, Chief. For everyone's sake, bury it. Hannah Cade is a liability. She's not your problem anymore. The line went dead before he could reply. He stared at the radio a long time, the silence pressing down like weight. He thought of Morrison's brass casing, the word respect etched deep. He thought of Hannah's calm voice in the kill zone, the way she'd moved like she'd been stitched into the rhythm of the valley itself. And he thought of the photograph, her standing in the shadows of men who had no names, no unit patches, no history. The program lives. Far from Bagram, Hannah sat in a safe house lit by a single bare bulb. Her rifle lay across her knees, every part cleaned, reassembled, ready. A pistol sat by her hand, silencer attached. She didn't sleep anymore. Sleep meant dreams, and dreams meant faces she could never erase. The burner phone buzzed once. A single word appeared on the cracked screen. Run. She let the message fade. Then, slowly, she powered the phone off and placed it face down on the table. She wasn't running. Not this time. At headquarters, men in suits gathered in a secure conference room, voices low and urgent. A file lay on the table, thin and red-stamped, Cade, Hannah. Terminate authority, active. She broke cover in Afghanistan, one of them said. If she resurfaces again, she compromises everything. Then make sure she doesn't resurface, another replied coldly. No debate. No hesitation. For people like her, there was only one endgame: silence. Rourke stood on the flight line at dawn, watching a pair of F-16s roar into the sky. The desert stretched out before him, endless, merciless. His men would heal. They would live. But Hannah Cade, she was already back in the shadows. And something in his gut told him the story wasn't over. Somewhere in Kabul, Hannah walked into the crowded morning streets, a scarf hiding her face. She blended into the flow of people, just another shadow slipping between shadows. But her eyes scanned constantly, reading angles, watching reflections in glass, tracking threats no one else saw. She felt it in her bones, the wolves were already moving. But wolves didn't frighten her. Because she was one of them.